they built it again. After the proud steel monsters of the Kaiserliche Marine were scuttled at Scapa Flow, not by enemy fire, but by the hands of their own crews, many believed Germany's great naval ambitions had died forever. But empires never forget their oceans. In secret bunkers in foreign naval academies, veterans of the lost fleet began to whisper again. They dreamt of Atlantic domination, of revenge for Jutland, of a new armada that would challenge the world once more. And for a fleeting moment, it almost happened. This is the story of how Germany's navy, humiliated after the Great War, rebuilt itself under the shadow of Versailles. How visionaries and fanatics, engineers and admirals, argued over what kind of war they wanted to fight, and how they lost not to bullets or bombs, but to something worse. Bureaucracy, politics, fantasy, and fate. Because in the end, it wasn't enemy fire that doomed the Kriegsmarine, it was the contradictions buried deep in its very keel. But how did a vanquished fleet rise again only to vanish beneath the waves? Let us begin where all forgotten ambitions begin, in silence. The year is 1919. The guns have fallen silent, the German Empire lies broken, and the once proud sailors of the Hochseflotte the High Seas fleet are prisoners of peace. At Scapa Flow, off the coast of Scotland, over 70 German warships are interned under British guard. But on the morning of the 21st of June, 1919, the silence is broken. One by one, those mighty vessels begin to sink. The sailors following orders from Rear Admiral Ludwig von Reuter open the seacocks and scuttle their own fleet. It is the largest self-inflicted sinking in naval history. This is not surrender. It is denial. The Treaty of Versailles that follows permits Germany only a skeleton navy. The Kriegsmarine with 6 battleships, 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. Submarines? Forbidden. Naval aviation? Banned. New ship tonnage? Capped at 10,000. To many, it seems like the final nail in the coffin of German sea power. But beneath this public humiliation, a quiet resolve is forming. Even as public opinion blames the Imperial Navy for Germany's defeat, accusing them of waste, arrogance, and cowardice, a new generation of naval thinkers refuses to accept the end of German maritime ambition. From 1920 onward, the Kriegsmarine begins a different kind of war, not one fought with guns, but with ideas. Young German officers are dispatched to naval academies abroad in Italy, Sweden, Argentina, not to fight, but to learn. Every year, the Kriegsmarine conducts classified war games. Tactical journals circulate among a close circle of officers. Old captains pore over their mistakes at Jutland. Naval doctrine is rewritten from the ground up. Among the most influential thinkers is Vice Admiral Wolfgang Wegener. In his seminal work Naval Strategy in the World War, Wegener argues that Germany's fatal error was strategic passivity. The fleet had been built, but never used decisively. It had failed to strangle Britain's lifeline, Atlantic commerce. Next time, he writes, Germany must strike first, not with battleships, but by cutting off Britain's oxygen, its trade routes. Seize Norway. Take Denmark. Use their ports to reach into the Atlantic and force the Royal Navy into a decisive battle on German terms. But not all agree. Another voice rises, quieter but more prescient. Admiral Erich Raeder. Raeder does not believe in a second Jutland. He believes Germany can never hope to match Britain ship for ship. Instead, he envisions a smaller, more flexible force commerce raiders, coastal defense vessels, submarines, and eventually aircraft carriers. His goal is not to dominate, but to disrupt, to force Britain to spread thin, to bleed slowly. It is not glory he seeks. It is pressure. This quiet doctrinal war continues through the 1920s, and despite restrictions, Germany begins to build. In 1929, the keel is laid for the Deutschland-class Panzerschiff armored ships. They are designed to outgun anything they can catch and outrun anything they cannot defeat. They are also 3,000 tons over the Versailles limit. Everyone knows. No one says a word. At the same time, another branch of the Kriegsmarine begins to rise again, this time in total secrecy. The submariners. Veterans of the U-boot Waffe gather in quiet offices and draft new blueprints. They share knowledge with Spanish and Dutch shipyards. They keep alive the Unterseeboot tradition, not as memory, but as prophecy. Among them is a brilliant, driven officer, Karl Dönitz. He does not merely rebuild the submarine fleet, he reinvents it. But Germany will not wait in the shadows for long. A new figure is rising in Berlin, a man who sees the Navy not as burden or mistake, but as instrument of power. His name is Adolf Hitler, and the Kriegsmarine is about to be born. In 1933, Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. To the battered admirals of the Reichsmarine, it is a chance, perhaps the last chance to rebuild their fleet into something worthy of the oceans again. Within months, Hitler meets Admiral Erich Raeder for the first time. Raeder is cautious, disciplined, conservative, but he sees something in Hitler, a man willing to defy the Treaty of Versailles, to pour resources into prestige, into power. By 1935, the Reichsmarine is reborn as the Kriegsmarine. The shackles of Versailles are cast off symbolically, diplomatically, and finally, militarily, with the signing of the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. The agreement is an astonishing gamble. Britain, seeking to avoid naval escalation, agrees to let Germany rebuild its navy up to 35% of the Royal Navy's tonnage. To Hitler, it is a masterstroke. To Raeder, it is a rare moment of freedom and pressure. He now has both permission and expectation. And so begins what would become a logistical nightmare, known simply as Plan Z. Plan Z is ambitious, too ambitious. It calls for 10 battleships, 4 aircraft carriers, 15 Panzerschiffe, hundreds of destroyers, cruisers, supply vessels, and submarines. The idea: build a fleet capable of contesting the Atlantic by 1944. But therein lies the tragic irony. Plan Z assume peace. Hitler, in his typical duplicity, swears to Raeder that war with Britain is unthinkable. "Give me time," he says. 4 more years. Raeder believes him. But war waits for no blueprint. In parallel, the Kriegsmarine begins work on an entirely new type of ship for Germany, an aircraft carrier. It is named Graf Zeppelin, a symbol of prestige and naval reach. The design calls for over 15,000 tons of displacement, a range of 12,000 nautical miles, and multiple turrets. The carrier is meant to project power far beyond Germany's coastline, a bold declaration of naval rebirth. But from the start, the project is cursed. There are no trained naval pilots. The Luftwaffe, under Hermann Göring, refuses to cede control of aviation. The Graf Zeppelin is laid down in 1936, but by its symbolic launch in 1938, it still has no planes, no fire control, and no political support. Raeder pushes on, but the cracks are beginning to show not in steel, but in strategy. Germany's military is now divided between 3 competing empires. The Heer, army, dominated by the conservative general staff, the Luftwaffe, a playground for Göring's ego, and the Kriegsmarine, struggling to justify its budget and vision. Each fights for resources. Each fights for relevance. And beneath them, in the engine rooms of ambition, Germany's industrial base begins to groan. The rise of Dönitz and the submarine rebellion. While Raeder dreams of carriers and capital ships, another admiral is quietly reshaping the Kriegsmarine's future from the shadows: Karl Dönitz. Dönitz is a U-boat man. He sees submarines not as support tools, but as the main weapon of maritime war. To him, the lessons of World War I are clear. Submarines can strangle Britain's trade, but only if used in new, aggressive ways. Dönitz develops the wolfpack strategy, brutal tactic squadrons of U-boats that coordinate via radio, attacking convoys from multiple angles. He trains his crews in surface night attacks, a radical tactic at the time. He champions the Type 7 submarine, small, cheap, and flexible, and for the longer Atlantic hauls, the Type 9. In the background, he watches as resources are wasted on grandiose plans and pointless vanity projects. In 1937, Dönitz tells his staff, 100 boats. That is the minimum. With 100 boats, we can win the tonnage war. But no one listens. Not yet. Because in Berlin, Hitler still dreams of fleets that gleam in the sun. The Bismarck. Symbol or folly? In 1936, two massive keels are laid down. Bismarck and Tirpitz, each over 40,000 tons, each designed to dominate a battle line. Each a ghost of a vanished age. They are equipped with radar, fire control systems, catapults for float planes. They are floating palaces of steel. But they are also traps. Diesel engines Raeder's original vision proved too difficult for German industry. The ships are forced to use traditional steam turbines, limiting range, increasing vulnerability. Meanwhile, Hitler's foreign policy accelerates. Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Raeder pleads for time. Dönitz warns of unreadiness. The shipyards are behind schedule. The pilots are untrained. The U-boat fleet is still under strength. But Hitler no longer waits for readiness. He waits for opportunity. And when war breaks out in September 1939, Germany's navy, for all its visions and debates, is utterly unprepared. Plan Z is dead. The war has come 5 years too soon. In the opening months of the Second World War, the Kriegsmarine found itself adrift in both vision and firepower. Its battleships were unfinished. Its aircraft carriers were unfunded. Its admirals were divided. But it still had teeth-sharp ones beneath the surface. And in that void of unfulfilled surface strength, Dönitz's U-boats began their silent hunt. The war of mines and ghosts. Though Germany lacked capital ships, it did not lack cunning. In late 1939, German minelayers quietly blanketed the English coast, Baltic Sea, and West Frisian Islands with explosives. These fields would go on to damage and sink hundreds of Allied vessels and remain dangerous for years. But the true surprise came from the sea lanes, far from Europe's mainland. Germany had repurposed 10 merchant vessels into Hilfskreuzer auxiliary cruisers or raider merchants. Camouflaged, armed, and crewed. By only 3,000 sailors in total, these ships operated across the globe. They were slow, they were weak, but they were effective. Over the course of the war, they sank 850,000 tons of Allied shipping, more than the entire Kriegsmarine surface fleet combined. These were the ghosts of a dead empire. Civilian ships turned assassins. Yet the traditional surface fleet fared worse. The vaunted Deutschland-class heavy cruiser Admiral Graf Zeppelin was cornered in the South Atlantic during the Battle of the River Plate and scuttled by her captain to avoid internment or defeat. Other heavy ships like Hipper and Prince Eugen suffered from range limitations again due to lack of proper diesel engines and were often relegated to half-hearted raiding or fruitless sorties. The gamble of Norway. Operation Weserübung. If there was one place where the Kriegsmarine shone, it was Norway. In April 1940, as part of Operation Weserübung, the German Navy transported troops, provided fire support, and engaged the British fleet to secure strategic positions in Norway and Denmark. The goal was twofold. Secure Sweden's iron ore transported via Norway's ice-free ports. Deny the British a foothold in Scandinavia. It worked. Barely. The Germans lost 10 destroyers, 1 heavy cruiser, and 2 light cruisers. It was costly, but it achieved its objective. More importantly, it gave Germany vital warm water ports, especially in Bergen and Narvik. Now the U-boats had new homes, and with them came destruction. The first happy time. Dönitz unleashed. From late 1940 into 1941, the Atlantic ran red. The U-boats struck without mercy. British sonar was primitive. Radar coverage was poor. Air patrols could not reach the mid-Atlantic. Convoys moved slowly, clumsily, often without escort. And Dönitz was ready. U-boat production surged. 16 per month by mid-1941. Entire Rudel tactic wolfpacks prowled the North Atlantic in coordinated strikes. Merchant ships exploded at night, dozens at a time. The British called it the first happy time. For Dönitz, it was confirmation. He had been right. Britain was bleeding. In tonnage. In morale. But while the U-boats feasted, the surface fleet bled. Bismarck's folly. In May 1941, the pride of the German fleet Bismarck set sail. Her mission: to raid British shipping lanes, escape through the Atlantic, and tie down Royal Navy forces. At first, she succeeded. She sank the legendary battlecruiser HMS Hood in minutes, killing over 1,400 sailors. But then, disaster. Damaged, leaking oil, pursued by nearly the entire Royal Navy, Bismarck was eventually crippled by torpedo bombers and finished off by British battleships. She had sailed for one mission. She never returned. In her wake, Hitler's faith in surface ships collapsed. So too did Raeder's position. The Mediterranean mirage. Raeder, seeking relevance, turned south. The Mediterranean theater was the only region outside the Pacific where the Axis held temporary naval superiority. Together with the Italian Regia Marina, Germany attempted to contest Allied control of Malta, Gibraltar, and the Suez route. It was a war of convoys, islands, and attrition. Raeder believed that this could be Germany's true maritime arena, where smaller forces, superior tactics, and Axis cooperation could yield meaningful results. He was wrong. The Luftwaffe failed to isolate Malta. The Italians proved inconsistent allies. And the Kriegsmarine was too small, too scattered, to dominate even here. Raeder's dreams shattered. By early 1943, he resigned. His replacement? The very man who had built the U-boat empire, Karl Dönitz. When Karl Dönitz took command of the entire Kriegsmarine in 1943, he inherited not a navy, but a shadow. The surface fleet was in ruins. The Graf Zeppelin, Germany's lone aircraft carrier, still unfinished after 7 years, was quietly mothballed. Dönitz did what he always did, focused on the submarines. In the dark winter months of 1942, the U-boat arm reached its zenith. Over 100 submarines prowled the Atlantic. Their kills were staggering: 627,000 tons of Allied shipping sunk in a single month. Even as Allied sonar and radar improved, Dönitz sought to outpace the enemy. New U-boat designs were commissioned, models with electric drives, to eliminate engine noise, snorkels, to allow underwater diesel operation and avoid surfacing, streamlined hulls for high-speed submerged travel. It was a technological revolution beneath the sea, but one fatal weakness remained: communication. The very system that enabled wolfpack coordination radio transmission now betrayed them. In May 1943, Allied codebreakers cracked the Enigma variants used by the U-boats. Suddenly, entire squadrons began disappearing. 47 submarines were lost in a single month. Nearly a quarter of all U-boat commanders at sea died that spring. It was not just defeat, it was decimation. Hitler's final betrayal. As the war turned against Germany, Hitler, increasingly paranoid and distrustful of all military branches, made a brutal decision. In late 1943, he ordered all capital ships scrapped. No more dreams of naval supremacy. No more surface fleet. Dönitz pleaded with him, face to face. Some ships were spared, but every major shipbuilding project, including the long-delayed Graf Zeppelin, was cancelled. Instead, remaining vessels were ordered to stay in port unless directly attacked a death sentence. British bombers began systematically destroying them at anchor. Ship by ship, the once ambitious Plan Z was erased, not by battle, but by inertia. The second happy time, and the silent end. Ironically, as the Atlantic War turned brutal, Dönitz's U-boats found new success not in Europe, but off the American coastline. In early 1942, following America's entry into the war, U-boats encountered an unprepared enemy. American ports were lit up. Convoys were disorganized. Coastal cities refused to black out their lights, making merchant vessels perfect silhouettes. It was carnage. German captains called it the second happy time, but it would not last. By 1944, Allied countermeasures were sophisticated and lethal. New ASDIC sonar, airborne radar, hedgehog mortars, and direction-finding aircraft meant that every submarine was hunted, tracked, and ambushed. Even the most advanced U-boat designs, the Silent Type 21, arrived too late. Many never saw combat. By 1944, over 75% of German U-boat crews would not survive their deployments. The hunter had become the hunted, and with each sinking came silence of steel and of memory. The final toll. By the war's end, the Kriegsmarine had suffered catastrophic losses. Nearly all surface ships destroyed or decommissioned. Almost 800 U-boats sunk. Over 28,000 submariners lost. Tens of thousands of sailors dead or captured. But they had not been idle. Despite its small size, the Kriegsmarine inflicted 14.5 million tons of Allied shipping lost, over 72,000 sailors killed, disruption across 3 oceans, and countless convoys. Yet by 1944, 99% of Allied ships reached their destinations intact. The war was no longer about commerce. It was about invasion. And Germany's navy tasked with defending Europe's coastline from Norway to Bordeaux was a phantom force. What few ships remained were buried in fords, rusting in harbors, or shattered on the sea floor. By the time Tirpitz, sister ship of the Bismarck, was sunk in a Norwegian fjord in late 1944, the Kriegsmarine was no longer a navy. It was a memory. In the years after the war, as Europe smoldered and borders shifted, the world turned its gaze to the ashes of armies and the ruins of empires. But somewhere in rusting dry docks, under bombed-out harbors, inside forgotten admiralty papers, the ghost of the Kriegsmarine still lingered. A question unanswered. An ambition unfulfilled. Not a navy defeated in combat, but denied its future before it began. A fleet without a war. The Kriegsmarine was, in many ways, a relic born too late and too early. Too late for the dreadnought wars of the First World War. Too early for the carrier-dominated Pacific clashes that redefined naval supremacy. It existed in a twilight zone, squeezed between the air age and the submarine revolution. Built for an Atlantic confrontation that never fully came. Hardened for a battle line it would never form. Strategized into chaos by men who rarely agreed. And ruled by a leader who never understood the sea. In a cruel twist, many of the Kriegsmarine's most advanced concepts, radar-directed gunnery, long-range subs, electrical propulsion, would be adopted after the war by the very navies that once hunted them. The wolf died, but its blueprints lived on. A final irony. The men who built the Kriegsmarine Raeder, Dönitz, Wegener, even the U-boat captains were not fools. They were often intelligent, forward-thinking, and tactical minds. They debated. They innovated. They adapted. And yet, in the end, they served a regime that weaponized their talents but refused to give them clarity, honesty, or unity. They were trapped between a treaty and an ambition, between steel and illusion, between war and water. And today, what does the story of the Kriegsmarine teach us now? That naval power is not built in shipyards alone, that the ocean does not bend to paper strategies, and that no matter how mighty the ship, without purpose, without coherence, without understanding, it is just steel waiting to sink. The sea is patient. It buries all things eventually, but memory floats. And perhaps, as long as we ask the hard questions, as long as we look at fleets like the Kriegsmarine not as failures, but as warnings, we will not be condemned to launch dreams that never reach water again. Thank you for sailing through history with us. If this voyage left you thinking, reflecting, or questioning, consider joining us again. Subscribe to Legacy Files, where every wreck has a story, and every story, a legacy.